To change the world, you first have to be brave enough to break the existing rules. Join our journey through the stories of rebels and outcasts who dared to dream of something better. Click subscribe now and join the ranks of those who dare.
The morning I landed in Atlanta, the air smelled like red clay and something I couldn't name. Something I hadn't let myself miss for 22 years. I told myself I was ready. I had rehearsed the reunion 100 times on the flight over. My daughter running to the door, her arms around my neck. Maybe tears. Good ones. What I wasn't ready for was the sight of her on her knees on the front porch, scrubbing the tile with a brush, wearing a house dress 2 sizes too big, her hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. She didn't look up when the taxi pulled in. She just kept scrubbing. I stood at the end of the driveway for a long moment with my suitcase beside me and the Georgia sun on my back, and I thought, this is the house I left her. This is the house that was supposed to protect her. I had been wrong about a great many things, but I had never been more wrong than I was the day I believed that leaving her a house meant leaving her safe. My name is Gloria. I am 64 years old. I worked as a registered nurse in Houston for 3 years before a hospital network in Brisbane. Australia recruited me in 2002. The pay was nearly triple what I made in Texas. My daughter, Renee, was 17 at the time, old enough, I told myself, to manage. Old enough to finish high school, go to college, build something. The house in Savannah was paid off. I had left her a paid-off house, a savings account with enough to cover 4 years of tuition, and a neighbor named Mrs. Patton who had promised to look in on her every week. What I had not left her, though I did not understand this until much later, was a mother present enough to notice when everything started going wrong. The first few years we spoke regularly. Sunday calls, sometimes Wednesday evenings. Renee told me about school, about her friends, about the boy she liked in her chemistry class. I told myself that this was enough, that love could cross 12 time zones if you were consistent about it. Then the calls got shorter, then less frequent. Renee said she was busy. I said I understood. Then one year I realized we had gone 11 weeks without speaking, and when I called, she picked up after half a ring like she had been sitting beside the phone waiting, and her voice was so flat and careful that I almost asked her outright what was wrong. I didn't. I told myself she was adjusting to adult life. I told myself that daughters pull away from their mothers. I told myself a lot of things that were easier than the truth. The truth was that I was afraid of what she might tell me. I first heard the name Marcus from my daughter about 5 years after I left. She mentioned him, the way you mention weather casually, as if he had always been part of the landscape. He was a few years older than her, she said. He had a good job. His mother was a woman named Diane who had known the family that used to live 2 streets over. I asked the questions a mother asks. Renee answered them all in that same flat, careful voice. I told myself she sounded content. By the time they married, I had met Marcus exactly once, on a video call that lasted 40 minutes. He sat beside Renee with his arm around her shoulder and smiled at the camera the entire time. He answered every question I asked her before she could open her mouth. When I addressed her directly, he would tilt his head slightly in her direction, just slightly, and she would pause for half a beat before she spoke. I noticed it. I filed it somewhere in the back of my mind and told myself I was looking for problems because I felt guilty about being far away. I was guilty. And I was also right. Those 2 things can both be true. And I spent a long time refusing to let them be. After they married, Renee's calls stopped almost entirely. When I reached her, she was brief and distracted. Once she called me from what sounded like a bathroom, her voice low, and said she had to go before I could ask her anything real. I called the house line and Marcus answered and said she was sleeping. I called the next day, and Marcus answered again and said she was out. The 3rd time I called and Marcus answered, I said, please tell her it's her mother, and it is not optional for her to call me back. He laughed. Not a mean laugh. Almost a warm one. Of course, he said. Of course, Gloria. She called back 3 days later. She said she was fine. She said Marcus was good to her. She said Savannah was the same as always. She said she had to go. I went back to filing things in the back of my mind. What finally made me book the ticket was not a dramatic phone call. It was a silence. Renee stopped answering entirely sometime in the fall of 2019. And I told myself it was the time difference, told myself it was her schedule, told myself every comfortable lie available to a woman who has built a life on the other side of the world and needs to believe the life she left behind is intact. Then COVID came, and I told myself I couldn't travel. Then my own health became an issue, a hip replacement, then recovery, then a second surgery, and I told myself I would go as soon as I was well enough. In January of this year, I was well enough. I booked the ticket on a Tuesday. I did not tell Renee I was coming. I told myself that was because I wanted to surprise her. The truth I didn't want to examine was that I was afraid if I warned her, Marcus would answer the phone and tell me calmly that it wasn't a good time. No one was going to tell me it wasn't a good time to see my own daughter in my own house. I want to be precise about what I saw that morning, because I have thought about it every day since, and I need to get it right. The house was the same from the outside. A white 2-story colonial with green shutters and a wide porch. Not a mansion, but a serious house. A house that meant something, a house I had bought with 18 years of savings before I ever thought about Australia. The lawn had been kept. The paint was relatively fresh. Someone had planted marigolds along the front walk, and for a brief, foolish second, I thought maybe things were fine. Then I saw Renee. She was on her knees on the porch with a scrub brush and a bucket. She was wearing a dress that did not belong to her. It was too big across the shoulders and had the look of something worn to do work, not to live in. Her hair, which she had always kept natural and full the way her grandmother taught her, was pulled back in a way that seemed designed to keep it out of her face rather than to look any particular way. She was thin, not healthy thin, the kind of thin that happens to people who are too tired or too stressed to eat properly. She was 39 years old, and she looked 50. I said her name from the end of the driveway. She looked up, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw something in her face that I can only describe as terror before she recognized me. Then, the terror became something else. Not joy, something more complicated than joy. She stood up slowly, the way a person stands when their body has been doing hard labor for a long time, and she said, "Mama?" Her voice broke on that single word. I left my suitcase at the end of the driveway and walked to her and put my arms around her, and she stood there for a second with her arms at her sides before she put them around me. And when she did, she held on with both hands like she had been afraid I wasn't real. I held her. I didn't say anything. I just held her. Then the front door opened, and Marcus stepped out. He was a tall man, neat and well-dressed even at that hour, and he looked at me with an expression I can only describe as controlled. Not surprised, not warm, controlled. He said, "Gloria, we weren't expecting you." I said, "No, I expect you weren't." He smiled. The same warm smile from the video call 15 years ago. "Come on in. Let me put some coffee on." He looked at Renee as he said it, and I felt her go slightly still beside me. "Renee, go ahead and finish the porch. I'll take care of your mother," I said. "Renee will come inside with me. The porch can wait." There was a pause. A very brief, very deliberate pause. Then Marcus said, "Of course," and held the door. I want to tell you what the inside of that house looked like, because it matters. The house was well furnished, beautiful. Even, there were new sofas in the living room and artwork on the walls, and a kitchen that had been fully renovated with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. Someone had spent real money on that house. But the bedroom Renee was sleeping in was not the master bedroom. The master bedroom, my bedroom, the room I had slept in for 12 years before I left for Brisbane, was Marcus and Diane's room now. Diane was Marcus's mother, who had moved in, according to what Renee told me later in a whisper while Marcus was on the phone. About 3 years after they married, Renee was sleeping in what used to be the guest room, a small room with a single window and a bed that was too narrow and a closet that had been partially taken over by Diane's off-season clothing. My daughter was sleeping in a guest room in her own house. I kept my voice calm. I have been a nurse for 30 years. Keeping your voice calm when things are very wrong is a professional skill I have had a long time. I sat with Renee at the kitchen table while Marcus made coffee and kept up a smooth, easy patter of conversation. How long was my flight? How was my hip? Wasn't Brisbane wonderful this time of year? He spoke about the house like he owned it. He referred to the renovations he had overseen. He talked about plans to expand the back deck as if he were discussing his own property. I asked Renee how she was doing with the house financially. Just that. Just a simple, direct question to my daughter about her own finances. Marcus answered. He said everything was being handled. He said Renee didn't need to worry herself about the details. He said it in the kind of tone that people use when they are telling you to stay in your lane. Renee did not say anything. She was looking at her coffee cup. I said, Marcus, I'm asking my daughter. He smiled again. He excused himself to make a phone call. The moment he was out of the room, Renee looked up at me with those eyes and I knew the way mothers know things they have been avoiding knowing. I reached across the table and took both her hands and I said, Baby, tell me everything. Right now. Fast. Before he comes back. What she told me in the next 8 minutes was not everything. There was not time for everything, but it was enough. The property taxes on the house had been redirected to an account she did not control about 4 years ago. She had signed papers, she said, when she was sick. A bad bout of pneumonia. The winter of 2020. And Marcus had told her they were insurance documents. She had not read them carefully. She had trusted him. He was her husband. She had trusted him. She did not know exactly what she had signed. She only knew that when she had tried to ask about it later, Marcus told her it was handled, and she didn't need to concern herself. When she pressed, he got quiet in a way that she had learned. Over 15 years meant she should stop pressing. Diane had moved in, not long after those documents were signed. Diane had taken the master bedroom. Renee had moved her things to the guest room without anyone telling her to. It had simply been made very clear to her, through 1,000 small daily signals, that the master bedroom was no longer hers. She had not called me, she said, because Marcus monitored her phone. She said this quietly and without drama, the way you say a fact. You have accepted. He didn't read her messages exactly, but he knew when she called, who she called, how long she talked. After the first few times she tried to call me, and he brought it up later with that quiet, careful voice of his, she had stopped trying. She had not left because she had nowhere to go. No savings she could access. No job. She had not worked outside the house since the first year of their marriage. When Marcus suggested, gently and reasonably, that it made more sense for her to manage the home, since he was earning enough for both of them, she had agreed. It had seemed reasonable. It had seemed like love. I sat there with my hands around my daughter's hands and I breathed. Then I took my phone out of my pocket and I called my attorney in Houston. His name is Raymond, and I have known him since 1998. And when he picked up, I said 4 words. I said, I need you here. Raymond flew in 2 days later. In those 2 days, I stayed in the house in the guest room with Renee because I was not going to leave her alone and I watched. Marcus was not cruel to me directly. He was smooth and hospitable in a way that made my skin crawl because I could see the machinery behind it. Diane was less careful. She spoke to Renee the way you speak to staff, short, directive, never please or thank you. She asked Renee to bring her things, to move her things, to clean things, to prepare things, and Renee did all of it with the trained compliance of a person who has been conditioned over years to understand what happens when she doesn't. Once, when I was in the hallway, I heard Diane tell Renee that she had better not cause any trouble just because her mother had shown up, because there was nothing her mother could do and they both knew it. I wrote that down in the Notes app on my phone. Date, time, exact words. I wrote down a great many things in those 2 days. When Raymond arrived, we met at a coffee shop on Drayton Street, and I laid out what I had gathered. Raymond is not a man who shows much expression. But at several points, he set down his pen and looked at me over his glasses in a way that told me what I had suspected. This was more serious than even I had thought. The documents Renee had signed during her pneumonia were not insurance forms. They were a power of attorney broad, sweeping, granting Marcus nearly full authority over her financial and property decisions. It had been prepared by an attorney Marcus had used for years. It had been signed while Renee was on a heavy course of antibiotics and had a documented fever of 102. Raymond said the words undue influence and capacity and potential fraud with the careful, specific tone of a man who means them legally. There was more. The property tax account redirection was one piece. There were also accounts opened in Renee's name credit lines, a home equity instrument that she had not knowingly authorized. Raymond suspected the power of attorney had been used. He would need to subpoena records, but his preliminary read was that Marcus had been systematically liquidating the equity in that house for years. My daughter's inheritance, my 20 years of work, had been used as a personal financial instrument by a man who had smiled warmly at my camera and answered all her questions before she could speak. I want to tell you I was angry. I was. But I was also something quieter and colder than anger. Something that felt like clarity. I had been angry at myself for 22 years of distance, and angry at him for what he had done with that distance, and I understood in that coffee shop on Drayton Street that neither of those feelings was useful right now. What was useful was Raymond and his yellow legal pad and his careful, specific language. Raymond filed for an emergency protective order within 48 hours. I will not walk you through every legal step because this is not a legal brief. What I will tell you is that the power of attorney was successfully challenged on the grounds of capacity and undue influence. An independent forensic accountant, hired by Raymond, documented the misuse of borrowed funds over $300,000 in home equity, accessed over 6 years, with no record of benefit to Renee. An investigation was opened. The DA's office got involved. Marcus was arrested on a Thursday morning. I watched from the living room window. He walked out with the officers calmly, the way he did everything smooth, controlled, performing reasonableness right up to the last second. Diane was arrested separately. Later that same day, she had been named as a beneficiary in 2 of the fraudulent accounts. She was not as calm. I won't pretend I felt nothing watching that. The house went through a legal process, I will not detail here, but Renee's ownership was confirmed and protected. The power of attorney was declared void. Civil proceedings for recovery of funds are still ongoing, and Raymond tells me we will likely see a significant portion returned over time. What I can tell you about the aftermath is not the legal part. The legal part was Raymond's. The part that was mine was harder. The day after Marcus was taken into custody, I sat down with my daughter in the kitchen she had cleaned 1,000 times at someone else's direction, and I said what I should have said years before. I said I was sorry. Not sorry in the general, sweeping way people apologize when they want to move past something. Sorry in the specific, detailed way that a person is sorry when they know exactly what they did wrong and they are willing to name it out loud. I named it. I said I left when you needed a mother present. I said I told myself you were old enough when the truth was that you being old enough was convenient for me. I said I noticed the signs and I filed them away because the alternative, coming home, disrupting the life I had built, facing what I had missed, was harder than telling myself a story about you being fine. I said I was sorry for every Sunday call that wasn't enough, and every year that passed without me on a plane, and every moment I chose comfort over clarity. Renee listened to all of it. She didn't cry. She just listened with her hands folded on the table. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. And then she said, "I know, Mama. I know you're sorry. I'm going to need some time." I said, "I have time. I'm not going anywhere." And I meant it. I put in my retirement paperwork the following week. Renee has a therapist now, a good one, a woman who specializes in coercive control, who Renee sees twice a week, and who I am told is helping her understand that what happened was not her fault, and that recognizing manipulation is not a failure of intelligence, but a human vulnerability. Renee is a smart woman. She was targeted by a skilled, patient predator who had 20 years to work with, and she survived it, and she is rebuilding. She has a job at a landscape architecture firm in Savannah. She always had a gift for plants, for growing things, which I would have known better if I had been here to notice. She goes to work in the morning wearing her own clothes and comes home in the evening, and we sit on the porch sometimes and talk about nothing important, and those evenings feel like the most valuable thing I have owned in a long time. The house still needs work. The equity that was taken from it leaves a gap that will take years to fill. But it stands. It is hers. It was always hers. I planted tomatoes in the backyard last month. Renee told me I'd put them too close together and they'd compete for nutrients. She was right. I transplanted them. They're doing fine now. I am 64 years old and I am learning. Late. That presence is not a thing you can wire transfer across an ocean or schedule for Sunday evenings. Presence is a body in a house. It is a mother who knows what her daughter's face looks like under regular light, not just the careful light of a video call. It is the kind of attention that catches things before they go too far wrong. I caught it. Later than I should have. Much later than I should have, but I caught it. And I am here now. That, I have decided, has to count for something.